In the abandoned Redwood train station, Grace Delaney clings to fading memories of her father's legacy, sweeping dust from empty corridors and stubbornly hoping trains might one day return. Then a mysterious stranger steps onto the deserted platform, stirring a glimmer of revival in both the broken station and her guarded heart. Now, as echoes of the past collide with new possibilities, Grace must decide, will she keep waiting for what was lost, or embrace the promise of a love that might finally set her free? The forgotten train station and a love that waited. A cold wind sifted through the abandoned train station, whispering through the rafters where dusty cobwebs stretched like spectral curtains. The building stood on the outskirts of Redwood, a small town tucked between rolling hills and a quietly winding river. Time had once passed briskly here, where travelers stepped off trains to greet families, find work, or journey further into the unknown. But now the tracks glimmered emptily beneath the fading sun, rust creeping over metal edges. Paint peeled from the battered walls of the station, and broken windows opened wide to the seasons. It was as if the old structure itself had grown weary of waiting, slowly surrendering to neglect. Grace Delaney knew every creaking board in this forlorn place. She had grown up in Redwood, the daughter of a station master who'd been as much a part of these train tracks as the steel itself. In her childhood, the trains still ran a skeleton schedule, enough for her to watch the trains come in and dream of journeys to distant cities. But as she grew older, the trains ceased. The station closed, and Redwood was left off the new schedules and modern maps. Sometimes it felt to Grace as though she, too, had been omitted from life's grand itinerary. Now in her early 30s, Grace had never ventured far from Redwood. She'd lived a life overshadowed by responsibility. After losing her mother to illness when she was still in high school, Grace had vowed to help her father maintain whatever piece of the station he could, even when it no longer brought them an income. The station was a second home to her. She knew the texture of the velvet benches, worn threadbare in places, and the chipped mosaic floor near the ticket counters. She could close her eyes and still smell the faint odor of old newspapers, engine grease, and coffee, scents now ghostly in the emptiness. Her father had passed away the previous winter, leaving Grace more alone than ever. The final heartbreak arrived when her fiancé, Preston, decided Redwood was too small to hold his ambitions, and perhaps, she often thought, too small to contain his love for her. He left a note on the kitchen table that read simply, "I need to go find my future." Grace found her future in tatters. Through the following months, she spent most evenings in the deserted station. It was an odd comfort, a place that mirrored her own sense of abandonment and longing for something that no longer existed. Each night, she would stand on the old platform, gazing into the distance where the tracks disappeared, a single string of iron into a dark horizon. Despite the station's dilapidated state, Grace was determined to preserve it. She worked as a librarian's assistant at Redwood's modest library. The pay was hardly enough for more than bills and groceries, but she set aside a tiny portion every month to buy paint, tools, and nails. Every few days she'd slip down to the station, pushing open the stiff old doors, sweeping floors, dusting surfaces. Sometimes her efforts felt like little more than a gesture, a form of prayer. But she persisted. What she did not expect was how the station would bring her to someone else's path, and how that meeting would change both of their lives forever. Late October sunlight slanted through the windows of Redwood's library, illuminating dust motes that danced through the air. Grace hunched over a battered ledger on the main desk, focusing on cataloging a new batch of donated books. Outside, the wind tugged at falling leaves, painting the sidewalks with gold, russet, and bright orange. For a moment, Grace paused to look at a photograph pinned on the corkboard beside her. It was a snapshot of the station in its heyday, taken decades before she was born. People milled about on the platform, some in neat hats and travel coats, others in overalls carrying bundles of produce or luggage. Her father's father, Henry Delaney, was in the corner of the frame, wearing his station master's cap. He had helped run Redwood Station when Redwood was still considered a blossoming community. Grace's father had grown up learning the railroad's rhythms before eventually taking the same role. She stared into the photograph's fixed smiles, a pang of wistfulness tugging at her chest. In the months since her father's passing, the library's steady hush had come to feel like her only real refuge. Silence was no stranger to her, especially with no one else at home. The small house she had inherited felt emptier every evening. Still, Grace tried to carry on. She often forced herself to remember small joys, the sight of dappled sunlight through the orchard behind her house, the gentle laugh of Mrs. Alvarez next door, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery run by her friend Lucy. She clung to these, even as she felt a persistent sense of being left behind by the rest of the world. That afternoon, Lucy strode into the library with Flower still dusting her sleeves. She was a small, robust woman in her 40s, with curly hair pinned at the back of her head. She worked tirelessly at her family's bakery on Main Street, ensuring Redwood's folks had their daily bread and pastries. "Grace, dear," Lucy said, leaning on the counter. "You look tired." A faint smile flickered on Grace's face. "I just have a few more logs to update before closing." Always with the logs and the dusty shelves. Lucy's bright eyes sparkled with concern. "And after you're done, are you going back to that place again?" Grace glanced down at her hands. "It's not that place, Lucy. It's my father's station. I just want to make sure it stays in one piece." Lucy placed a hand over Grace's. "I know. It's just, I worry about you. You've been burying yourself in that old station for months. Don't forget there's a life for you somewhere beyond those dusty walls." Grace took a breath. She recognized Lucy's concern came from a place of love. "I know. I promise I'm fine." Lucy searched Grace's eyes for a few seconds, then nodded and patted her hand. "All right then. If you need anything, cookies, bread, an entire cake, I'm your woman." "Thank you, Lucy." Grace gave her a more genuine smile. "I appreciate it." "You're welcome," Lucy said. "Now I should hurry back before the dough-over rises and we have a bakery explosion." When Lucy left, Grace closed the ledger, locked up the desk, and began shutting down the library. Outside, the late afternoon sun had begun its descent. She walked the few blocks towards her home, noticing how quiet Redwood was. Only a handful of cars, a few families strolling with their children. This wasn't city life, with its hustle and promise of something new each day. Redwood existed in a bubble of stillness. Part of her loved it, part of her felt trapped. Just before reaching her house, she glanced down the old gravel road that led to the train station. She did not hesitate. With gentle determination, Grace turned, walked past her driveway, and continued on. It was nearly twilight when she approached the station. She stepped under the battered awning, the wood overhead groaning softly. She found her usual bench inside the main hall, the one partially illuminated by the single overhead light she had managed to restore. The bulb flickered occasionally, but it shone enough to reveal dust particles swirling in the gloom. Sometimes she brought a lamp from home to brighten the place, but tonight she simply sat in the half-shadows. On the ticket counter, an old ledger still remained the station's final schedule from years ago. Grace had read it countless times, memorizing the departure and arrival times. She traced a finger over the lines, her heart heavy with memory. Yet, in her loneliness, she felt a flicker of resolve. This place was more than a relic. It was a testament to the small joys and the modest pride Redwood once had. It was tied to her father's legacy, and, for better or worse, it was tied to her own. It was mid-November when the letters arrived in Redwood's mailboxes, stamped with the insignia of the Redwood Historical Preservation Society. A new initiative had begun, spurred on by the state's interest in connecting smaller communities for tourism. The letter announced that Redwood's train station might be considered for a historical site restoration project. If certain conditions were met, Grace's heart fluttered as she read through the lines. A wave of excitement coursed through her, mingled with apprehension. Could Redwood's forgotten station truly be revived? She discovered that officials from the state's preservation department would be making a visit in a few weeks to survey the station. Grace spent every spare moment cleaning, repairing broken stairs, and painting walls. Her meager savings vanished into paint cans, brushes, and wood planks. At times, she paused, overwhelmed by the scope of it all. But the faint possibility of seeing trains once again gliding along those tracks kept her pushing forward. She worked late into nights, her lantern flickering as she hammered nails or tried to scrub graffiti from the outside walls. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace was in the midst of painting a window frame when she heard a car pulling up outside. She set down her brush, wiping her hands on a rag. Very few people visited at such an hour. Cautiously, she stepped around the corner and saw headlights shining through the dusty glass of the main entrance. A tall figure emerged from a modest sedan. He wore a long coat, scarf tugged tightly around his neck against the chilly wind. Though a shadow fell across his features, Grace could see he was relatively young, perhaps mid-30s, and carried a messenger bag. She hesitated, unsure if he was lost or if he might be one of the surveyors arriving early. She walked to the door as he pushed it open. The overhead bulb flickered, illuminating them both in the softly lit vestibule. "Hello," she said, heart thumping. "Can I help you?" The man looked around with keen interest. "I'm not sure, to be honest," he replied gently. "I'm looking for Redwood Station, or what used to be Redwood Station. My name's Daniel Knox. Are you, by any chance, Grace Delaney?" His voice was warm, carrying a hint of curiosity that put her slightly at ease. Grace blinked. How do you know my name?" A faint, apologetic smile twitched on his lips. "Lucy from the bakery told me I might find you here. I stopped by just before they closed to ask for directions to the station. She said if anyone knew anything about Redwood Station, it would be you." Despite herself, Grace felt a small surge of gratitude that Lucy had pointed him her way. "Yes, I'm Grace." She extended a paint-smeared hand, realized it was dirty, then let it drop. "So, are you part of the survey team?" He shook his head, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. The wind whistled as if lamenting the loss of an escape route. "No, I'm an architectural historian, here on my own. I heard rumors about Redwood Station possibly being revived, and I wanted to see it for myself. I'm writing an article on neglected small town stations, those that close but might still be salvaged." Grace's eyes brightened. "Oh, that's wonderful. I was starting to think no one cared about this place anymore." She bit her lip, trying not to sound too hopeful. "Would you like a tour?" He nodded, eyes sweeping the dim interior. "If you have time." "I don't want to impose." "Not at all," she said, heart fluttering with a new sort of excitement. "I'm here most evenings anyway." They walked through the main hall, Grace pointing out the benches she'd refurbished, the old mosaic floor that had once been a pride of Redwood's craftsmanship. Daniel ran his fingers carefully over the walls, feeling the peeling paint, the cracks in the plaster. There was an intensity in his gaze, as though he saw not just the broken pieces, but the station's potential. Grace found herself warming to his presence in a way she hadn't expected. He asked thoughtful questions, scribbling notes in a small journal he pulled from his bag. At one point, they came to a section of the waiting area where an old, warped billboard hung crookedly. It featured an advertisement for Redwood apples, proclaiming, "Taste the crisp freshness of Redwood." With a cartoonish orchard in the background, Grace exhaled slowly. "My father never took it down, even after the orchard closed. He used to say Redwood would find its feet again one day, that the orchard might come back, too." Her voice quivered slightly on that last sentence. Daniel turned toward her. "It sounds like he believed in this place." "He did," Grace said, forcing a small smile. Sometimes that was all he had, faith. They finished the brief tour in an upstairs office. The door stuck until Daniel gave it a firm push. Inside, old file cabinets lined the walls, their drawers rusted shut. The stale air held a faint scent of mold and paper. Daniel took a few pictures with his phone, capturing the heartbreak and promise etched into these old rooms. When they finally stepped back downstairs, Daniel lowered his camera. "Thank you, Grace. This has been incredibly helpful. I'll write up my observations tonight, and maybe tomorrow we could talk more, if that's all right." Grace noticed the time, nearly 10 o'clock. She should have been home hours ago. Yet she didn't regret staying. Something about Daniel's presence stirred a spark she had long forgotten: hope. "That's all right," she said, nodding. "I'm off work at the library around 5. You can meet me there, or I could show you the new parts I'm restoring tomorrow evening." He smiled. "That sounds perfect. I'm staying at a little motel near Main Street. Can't be more than 10 minutes away from anywhere in Redwood, right?" She laughed softly, the sound surprising her after so many months of silence. Yes, Redwood is definitely not known for its traffic jams. They shared a smile, and in that moment, something connected between them. A shared reverence for the station's quiet resilience, or maybe simply the warmth of two solitary hearts meeting in a lonely place. Daniel paused by the door, adjusting his scarf. "Take care heading home, Grace. Thank you again." "You too," she managed softly, as he stepped out into the night. For a long time she stood there, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade, heart drumming in her chest. Then she turned to look around the station. It felt somehow less abandoned, as if the dusty corners had stirred awake at Daniel's fascination. The old building was not alone anymore, and neither, she realized with a flicker of wonder, was she. The next weeks unfolded into a pattern Grace hadn't known she needed. During the day, she worked at the library while Daniel wandered Redwood, talking to townspeople, snapping photos of old houses and historical markers. In the evenings, he met her at the station. Sometimes he'd bring them both coffee or tea. She showed him which planks needed replacing, which windows might still be saved. He helped hammer where he could, or hold a ladder steady, or simply stand by, gently teasing her for her single-minded devotion to this crumbling time capsule, as he once jokingly called it. Despite the teasing, Grace sensed Daniel's genuine respect for what she was doing. He seemed drawn to the station's silent grandeur, and even more drawn to the story behind it. Her father's dedication, her own vow to keep it standing. She learned he was from a mid-sized city upstate, had worked for a university as an adjunct professor before deciding to branch out on his own, researching historical structures. He'd grown wary of the bureaucracy and had decided to write a comprehensive book on small railway stations that had once formed America's lifeline of travel. They fell into an unspoken friendship. One crisp evening, she found him wearing work gloves, rummaging through a neglected supply closet in the station's old staff quarters. She entered, the single overhead bulb illuminating a swirl of dust as she sneezed. "You okay?" he asked, pushing aside boxes of old timetables. She waved a hand in front of her face. "Yes, just a bit dusty." Her eyes watered, and she coughed. "What are you looking for?" "Just seeing if there's anything interesting." He lifted a wooden box, sneezing himself when a cloud of dust erupted. "Look at this. There's something inside." They pried it open, revealing piles of old postcards and letters. Many were from travelers, some dated nearly a century ago. The postcards, still vibrant despite age, depicted Redwood Station in its prime. One letter, battered and yellowed, was addressed to a name Grace didn't recognize. She read it out loud softly. "My dearest, I write in haste as the train is set to depart in just a few minutes. I cannot wait to see you next summer. Redwood is quiet these days, but I dream of the orchard blossoming again and laughter echoing through these walls. Wait for me, please. I promise I'll come back." She paused, her voice faltering, overwhelmed by how personal and poignant these words felt. Daniel let out a slow breath. Imagine all the hidden stories here sealed away. Hopes, promises, heartbreaks left behind when the train stopped coming. Grace gently replaced the letter in the box. "That's why I can't let it decay. It's more than a building. It's a testament to all those journeys. and all those who loved enough to send a letter saying, "Wait for me." Their eyes met in the dim light, a gravity passing between them. Neither said anything for a moment, but both felt the weight of unsaid hopes and fears. Finally, Daniel gave a small nod, as if acknowledging her resolve. "Let's keep looking," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "We might find more treasures." As days turned into a few weeks, Daniel's official reason for being in Redwood seemed overshadowed by an unspoken connection blossoming between him and Grace. She was hesitant to label it, her heart still bruised from Preston's departure. But something about Daniel's gentle sense of humor, his genuine inquisitiveness, and the quiet empathy he showed her made her feel more alive than she had in years. One evening, after finishing some repairs in the station's foyer, they found themselves standing outside, dusk painting the sky in lavender and pink. The wind carried a chill, so Daniel rummaged in his bag and produced a spare scarf, draping it around Grace's shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured. The scarf smelled faintly of him, clean with a hint of cedar or maybe pine. She felt the heat rising in her cheeks. They leaned against the station's outer wall, gazing at the horizon where the tracks stretched, half hidden by tall grass. For a long moment, neither spoke. A gentle hush enveloped them, the world shrinking to just their breaths visible in the cold air. Daniel broke the silence. "You said your father was the station master here." She nodded. "He was until the day he died, at least in his heart. Even after the train stopped, he dressed in his uniform sometimes, as if expecting a train might show up at any minute." Daniel's expression softened. It sounded like a man who believed in what mattered to him, even if the rest of the world moved on. She blinked back tears. "Yes, he taught me how important it was to hold on to hope, even if it seemed foolish." There was a pause as Daniel looked at her. "I wish I'd met him. He must have been proud of you." Her breath caught. "I hope so. I'm still here, trying to keep his dream alive, but some days I wonder if I'm just stuck in the past. Maybe Redwood Station is just a shell, and I'm stalling my own life trying to fix something that's beyond saving." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Do you really believe that?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Sometimes yes. After my fiancé left, I guess I felt like there was nothing else I could do but come here, as if I could find some purpose, or at least distract myself from that emptiness." An H tugged at her voice as she realized how deeply she yearned for someone to understand. And here, in the fragile twilight, Daniel listened without judgment, a comforting presence rather than the pity or disinterest she'd grown used to. He slid his hand over hers, gently. She startled slightly at the warmth of his touch, but she didn't pull away. "Grace, I think you're doing something beautiful here, because it matters to you and to Redwood. Whether or not it's recognized by the world, you give the station a second chance. And maybe in the process it's giving you a second chance too." His words stole her breath. She blinked, tears threatening. "Thank you." They stood like that for a moment, hands entwined, the sun's last rays slipping behind the hills. Grace felt an unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something like hope or the possibility of love, or at least the gentle promise that she wasn't alone on this platform anymore. The night of the scheduled survey finally arrived. A small team from the state's preservation department, wearing reflective jackets and sturdy boots, stepped into Redwood Station with clipboards and cameras. Grace tried not to hover, tried to let them inspect and note the station's condition without coming across as frantic. But inside, she felt like a drum, taut with anticipation. Daniel stood by her side, offering quiet moral support. At times, he answered the officials' questions with an expertise that both impressed and reassured her. He cited structural possibilities, historical significance, potential for revitalizing Redwood's tourism. Grace watched him speak, her heart swelling with gratitude and a warm affection that she couldn't deny. Yet, as the team wrapped up, their expressions guarded. One of them, a tall woman named Ms. Proctor, pulled Grace and Daniel aside. In crisp language, Ms. Proctor laid out their findings. "Yes, The station had historical value. Yes, Redwood could potentially be placed on the state's restoration list, but the building was in rough shape, and the cost would be considerable. Funding was uncertain. The best Grace could hope for was a recommendation. Final approval might take months or years, if it ever happened. When they left, Grace stood on the platform, the sound of their vehicles disappearing into the night. A hollow ache pulsed in her chest. She thought she would feel elation at the possibility, but Miss Proctor's measured words had stolen her confidence. If Redwood Station was added to a waiting list of dozens or hundreds of other sites, it could be years, maybe never, before real restoration began. Daniel placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Don't lose heart. This is a step in the right direction." She exhaled shakily. "Is it? Or did they just feed me vague platitudes? Maybe Redwood is too small, too obscure to qualify for funding in a timely manner." She gave a bitter laugh, quickly stifling it. "I'm sorry. I understand," he said softly. "I know how it feels when bureaucracy tangles dreams in red tape." A tear slipped down her cheek. She turned her face away, embarrassed. "It's not just about this station, Daniel. It's everything. I've held on to Redwood my whole life, and it's as if no one else does. Not enough to keep the orchard alive, or the trains, or the shops. People leave. My mother died, my father's gone, my fiancé left. And now, maybe even the station won't be saved." Daniel slowly turned her to face him, wiping the tear with his thumb. "What about you, Grace? Do you want to leave Redwood?" She stared, the question twisting in her chest. "I don't know. My father always dreamed I'd see more of the world. Part of me wants to, but I can't bear the thought of letting the station decay. It's like letting him down." Daniel's eyes searched hers. "I've been offered a job back in the city," he admitted quietly. "A position at a historical firm that would let me expand the scope of my research, maybe even push for Redwood Station restoration from a higher level. The timing is a bit complicated, but it's a chance I probably shouldn't pass up." Grace's heart hammered. That's wonderful, Daniel. Congratulations." He hesitated, voice heavy. "It means leaving Redwood soon." Her eyes flickered with pain. "Right. Of course you have your own life to lead." "Grace," he began, reaching for her, but she stepped back, hugging her arms around herself. "It's okay," she said, forcing a tremulous smile. "I'm happy for you. Really. Maybe you can do more from there to help Redwood than you can from here." He swallowed. "I don't want to leave you here alone, grappling with the station." She managed a shrug. "I've been alone before." His gaze softened with regret. "I'd rather you not be." Their words lingered in the hush of the deserted platform. Grace closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the swirl of emotions. She had only just begun to feel something bright, like the first blossom of spring, when confronted with the possibility that Daniel might vanish as quickly as he arrived. Over the next few days, Grace wrestled with her turmoil. She tried to keep busy at the library, but her mind drifted. She pictured Daniel packing up, heading to some city with tall buildings and bright lights, a place Redwood could never match. He'd work at a prestigious firm, possibly even find ways to champion Redwood Station from afar. Meanwhile, she'd remain, continuing her lonely fight, but her heart wouldn't let her rest. She felt torn between clinging to Redwood out of loyalty and yearning for a future that might exist beyond the town's borders. She had never wanted to abandon her father's legacy, but maybe Daniel's question had awakened something in her. What did she truly want? At some point, was letting go a form of courage rather than betrayal? Winter arrived abruptly one evening, blanketing Redwood with an early snowfall. Flurries drifted past the streetlights, collecting on rooftops. The station's platform, eerily beautiful under the snow, reflected moonlight in a gentle silver sheen. Grace stood under the battered awning, breath pluming in the cold air, waiting. She had asked Daniel to meet her tonight, desperate to talk before he made a final decision about leaving. She heard the crunch of boots in the snow behind her and turned. He approached with his hands shoved in his coat pockets, a knitted cap on his head, and a solemn look in his eyes. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," she returned, voice trembling slightly from both the cold and her nerves. She studied his face, noticing how tired he seemed. "I'm sorry to drag you out here?" He shook his head. "Don't be. I wanted to come." They stepped inside the foyer, where Grace had lit a couple of lanterns to cast a warm glow over the dusty interior. Snowflakes drifted through one of the cracked windows, landing on the old mosaic floor. For a moment they both stared at the gentle swirl as if enthralled by a silent dance of light and snow. Grace broke the silence, her voice unsteady. "You know the orchard behind my house? It used to belong to my grandparents. They'd produced some of the best apples in the region. But after a couple of hard winters, disease, and changes in farming, the orchard just died. No one came to buy Redwood apples anymore." She cleared her throat. "It's the same story with the train station, the same story with so many things around here. They wither. People move on." Daniel reached for her hand. "Grace." She shook her head gently. "Just listen. I used to think that holding on was the bravest thing. But maybe I'm finally starting to understand that change is inevitable, and sometimes letting go can be just as brave." Daniel's eyes shimmered with sympathy and relief. "What are you saying?" She pressed her free hand against the cold wall, her father's face flashing in her mind. "I'm saying that Redwood will always be my home, but it can't be my prison. If the station gets restored, I'll celebrate from anywhere in the world. And if it doesn't, well, I did my best. I honored my father's memory, and I won't ever forget what this place meant to me." Tears slid down her cheeks, but she felt an odd sense of calm. "But I can't keep waiting here for trains that never come." Daniel stepped closer, gently cupping her face. "Grace, come with me. Let's find a new way to preserve Redwood's story. Let's do it together, maybe from the city, or from anywhere else. We can still push for its restoration. You don't have to abandon your father's dream just because you're living somewhere else." A sob quivered in her throat, and she buried her face in his chest, letting the tears come. Snow fluttered in the open window, the station's old rafters moaning softly. For the first time in so long, she felt truly seen, truly loved. They stood that way for a while, hearts beating in tandem, the hush of the forgotten station enveloping them like a blessing. At last, she pulled back, eyes red, face tinged with the cold. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," Daniel said, lacing his fingers with hers. "So am I. But maybe that's where the best stories start." She gave a small, tearful laugh. "I think my father would have liked you." He grinned, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "I would have liked him, too." Outside, a distant sound penetrated the quiet. A train horn. They both turned, startled. It had to be freight passing far off on the main line miles away. Yet the moment felt almost mystical, as though Redwood Station itself were offering an echo of encouragement. Grace gripped Daniel's hand tighter, a fresh surge of determination lighting in her chest. That winter, Grace packed up her little house, salvaging cherished items. The orchard's bare trees stood stoic in the snow as she walked its rows one last time, remembering the childhood days when her mother and father ran among the blossoms, laughter echoing under the spring sun. Lucy promised to keep an eye on the place, maybe even turn the orchard into a community garden. Grace gave her friend the key, hugging her tightly amidst tears and goodbyes. Daniel departed a week earlier to begin final negotiations with the historical firm in the city. He left Grace a note pinned to her front door on the day he left Grace. "I'll be waiting for you at the city station next Friday, 6 p.m. on Platform 2. I know it's scary to leave Redwood, but if you come, we'll find our next journey together. Forever yours, Daniel." Grace folded the note, holding it to her heart. She breathed in the wintry air. Her entire life had been lived in Redwood, in this quiet cradle of memories. But that note pulsed with a promise. The same promise Redwood Station had held in postcards and letters from decades past. "Wait for me. I'll come back for you." Only this time it was an invitation to step forward into the unknown. On the morning she left, the sky over Redwood was a brilliant tapestry of pale blue and sunrise gold. She tucked her suitcases into the trunk of a friend's car, one of Lucy's bakery suppliers who offered to drive her to the nearest city that actually had an operating train line. The journey felt surreal. The roads wound out of Redwood past farmland, bare forests, and eventually into the outskirts of a larger town. There, she found the train station bustling with travelers. Grace's heart pounded as she purchased a ticket, an action so simple, yet it felt monumental. The train arrived with a rumbling approach, brakes squealing. She boarded, settling into a window seat, the engines vibrating through her bones. As the train lurched forward, Redwood receded in her mind, a mixture of relief, nostalgia, and a bittersweet longing. She watched the winter landscape glide by, fields dusted with snow. For the first time, she was a traveler, not waiting on a platform for something to come to her. When she arrived at the city station that evening, lights sparkled from high ceilings, and crowds bustled in every direction. The announcement boards flickered with arrivals and departures. Grace clutched her bag, scanning for a sign of Daniel. Her heart drummed. What if he changed his mind? What if the job fell through? What if? Then she spotted him, standing on platform 2, glancing anxiously at every new passenger who stepped off. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. Instead, she darted forward, tears gathering in her eyes. "Grace!" he called, relief flooding his tone. She dropped her bag and practically flew into his arms, laughter mixing with tears as he held her tight. People bustled around them, but in that moment, it was as though the entire station belonged to just them. They sat in a nearby cafe inside the station to catch their breath. Daniel ordered them tea and pastries, the swirl of city sounds buzzing around them. Grace marveled at the contrast from Redwood's quiet roads. She felt a knot in her stomach, equal parts excitement and fear. This was a new chapter. She only prayed she was strong enough to face it. Daniel reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers. "I spoke to some colleagues about Redwood Station," he said. "They're intrigued. They want to hear more about ways to preserve it. I've still got to settle in, but maybe soon we can set up a meeting with Miss Proctor and other local representatives. Try to get Redwood on the official list." Grace stared at him in wonder, tears gathering again. "You're serious?" He smiled crookedly. "Dead serious. If Redwood gets recognized as a historically significant site, we can push for grants, secure real restoration funds." She let out a shuddering breath. "Thank you, but what if it never happens?" His thumb traced circles on her hand. "Then we did everything we could, and Redwood Station will still stand, at least in our hearts. Some places get a second chance, some don't, but at least we'll know we gave it our best." He paused. "And that station brought us together, Grace. That's worth more than any official grant." She nodded, tears slipping free. "You're right." Over the following weeks and months, Grace adjusted to city life. She found a small apartment near the firm where Daniel consulted. The transition was jarring. Sometimes she missed Redwood's quiet mornings, Lucy's bakery, the orchard's gentle shade. And especially, she missed the station itself, its old boards and echoing corridors. Yet she was never truly separated from it, because her memories, her father's legacy, lived on inside her. She and Daniel spent evenings drafting proposals, calling Redwood's town council, sending letters to the Preservation Society. They documented every structural detail, every historical nuance. And while the wheels of official approval turned slowly, they turned nonetheless. Word trickled back that Redwood Station had advanced to a more serious stage of consideration. Months stretched, but through it all, Grace carried that flicker of hope. One crisp spring afternoon, Grace received an official envelope in the mail. Tearing it open, she skimmed through lines dense with government jargon until she saw the words, "Preliminary approval." Her heart soared. They hadn't won the final war, but a major battle had been gained. Crying out, she waved the letter at Daniel, who rushed over and scooped her up in a jubilant hug. "We did it." She laughed, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. He planted a gentle kiss on her forehead. "And we'll keep doing it." Months later, they returned to Redwood for the final hearing with the Preservation Society. The orchard trees were budding, new leaves shimmering in the mild sunshine. Grace walked those familiar roads, feeling both the ache of nostalgia and the thrill of seeing them as a visitor now. Lucy welcomed them with a feast of freshly baked pies. Neighbors greeted them curiously, noticing how Grace now carried herself with renewed confidence, and how Daniel stood by her side, as if it were the most natural place in the world. They held the hearing in the old Redwood Town Hall. It was a modest affair with folding chairs and a squeaky microphone. Officials, townspeople, and a scattering of curious onlookers gathered to hear final testimonies about Redwood Station. Grace, trembling but determined, stepped to the front. She spoke from her heart, of her father's devotion, of the station's place in Redwood's identity, of the travelers who once passed through. She read excerpts from the letters they had found in that wooden box, painting a vivid picture of a bygone era steeped in small-town dreams and genuine human connection. She concluded with a trembling voice, "These walls aren't just wood and stone. They held hope, love, and the promise of return. They still do." Applause erupted in that small hall. Even Miss Proctor, the once guarded official from the Preservation Department, dabbed at her eyes. Daniel gave Grace's hand a grateful squeeze, pride shining in his gaze. The official verdict came down the following week. Redwood Station was granted funding for a multi-phase restoration. The news spread through Redwood like a sunbeam cutting through a cloudy day. It would take time, perhaps years, to bring the station back to a functional condition, but the momentum was in motion. No longer a lonely relic, Redwood Station was now recognized as an integral part of the community's heritage and future. A year later, Grace and Daniel stood on the newly refurbished platform of Redwood Station, along with a small crowd of townspeople. It was just a test run, the tracks partially restored, the old station shining with fresh paint, its windows replaced. In the background, the orchard behind Grace's house showed signs of new saplings, an attempt by Lucy and other volunteers to reintroduce Redwood's apples. A single-engine railcar was set to arrive that day, carrying a small group of officials and journalists to commemorate the station's revival. The sound of the approaching train echoed across the fields, just as Grace remembered from her childhood. But this time it was not a memory, not a ghost. It was real, roaring closer, its headlights cutting through the crisp autumn air. Daniel gently slipped an arm around Grace's waist. She looked at him, marveling at how life had changed since they first met. She still worked part-time in the city library system, commuting from Redwood a few days each week, but as Redwood Station's restoration ramped up, she increasingly found herself drawn back here, leading guided tours, organizing volunteers, and serving as the site's informal curator. Daniel continued his historical research, now more enamored than ever with small-town stations, especially the one that had transformed his life. The train glided into the station, brakes hissing. A hush fell over the gathering. When the doors slid open, Ms. Proctor stepped out beaming, followed by a small crew of photographers. Cheers erupted from the townspeople, some waving homemade signs, children bouncing with excitement. Grace felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, the moment feeling like a dream come true. She and Daniel led the officials inside, showing off the restored waiting room. The mosaic floor now gleamed under new lighting. The benches had been replaced, though a few original seats remained for historical authenticity. Photographs of Redwood Station through the decades lined one wall, chronicling its rise, fall, and rebirth. Among them was a picture of Grace's father in his station master uniform, pinned beside a plaque dedicating the station's restoration to his memory. "This is for you, Dad," she whispered under her breath. Daniel's hand found hers. She squeezed it, looking around at the busy, joyous crowd, the swirling of conversation and laughter that had once been only a memory. Redwood Station was alive again, humming with possibility. As the celebration continued, Grace and Daniel slipped away to a quiet corner of the platform, near the spot where they had first stood together. The train tracks stretched into the horizon, a promise of journeys still to be taken. She leaned her head on his shoulder, exhaling contentedly. "Thank you for waiting," she said softly. "For me to be ready for this." He turned, pressing a gentle kiss to her hair. "I'd wait a lifetime," he murmured. "But I'm glad it didn't take quite that long." She laughed, eyes shining, recalling the letter they once discovered, a traveler's plea that someone wait for him. She realized that sometimes in life, people indeed do wait. For lost loves, for second chances, for the courage to take a different path. Redwood Station had waited too, amid peeling paint and broken windows, for someone to come along and restore its purpose. Now, with new lines of steel, new timetables, and a renewed sense of belonging, it stood as a testament to all who dared to hope. Grace lifted her gaze. The sun dipped behind the rolling hills, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, reflecting on the polished rails that shimmered with potential. "I think," she said softly, "that I finally understand my father's faith. He believed that no matter how forgotten something seems, there's always a chance for it to bloom again." Daniel nodded, voice thick with emotion. He was right. They held each other, hearts brimming with gratitude, the whistle of the station's new engine echoing across the twilight. A sense of completion washed over Grace, as well as the promise of everything that lay ahead. Together she and Daniel stepped back inside, their footsteps echoing across a station floor that no longer felt deserted but teemed with life. Within that gentle hum, a future unspooled, a future where Redwood Station continued to stand, bridging past and present, a home for returning travelers and those seeking new horizons. In that quiet, powerful moment, Grace knew she had finally found her place in the world, not by staying put, nor by fleeing blindly, but by choosing to carry her past into a future shaped by love, by memory, and by the steadfast belief that some trains, like some hearts, are never truly lost. They only wait, at a forgotten station, for the right moment to come roaring back to life.